Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We thought it might be interesting for you to hear from some of the leadership team and have them reflect a bit on their professional path after Hugsy. So we will do 3 rounds of questions, and I ask our leadership team to be succinct. The question that we'll start with is, please share with us which program at Hugsy you were in and any subsequent degrees. What are you doing professionally now in the field of education? And is this where you imagined you would be when you graduated from Hugsy? We will go in alphabetical order of first names, so we'll start with Avery.
Hello, everyone. So I mentioned that I focused in higher ed administration and had the opportunity to work at several universities in residential life, student affairs, multicultural affairs, and HR, human resources, and went on to acquire my MBA from Emory University, which is the last university that I worked at least at this point in my life. And when I started at Hugsy, I had the vision I was going to be Dean of Students. That's what I had as my roadmap in terms of my career, and was enjoying that path actually in terms of getting exposure to different parts of the university world and life and administration. And so that was the journey. But then I got into human resources, and that took me on a completely different path. So to your first question, was this the path I thought I would be taking? And it's sort of like a yes, no. I definitely see myself at some point returning to the traditional educational, higher ed educational environment, but I've enjoyed the second part of my career, which has been in corporate America, nonprofit organizations, applying what I learned in adult learning and administration and policy. So it's a yes and. I thought I would be somewhere else, but I'm definitely enjoying the journey.
Thank you so much, Anadri. Derek, you're next up.
Hey everyone, my name is Derek Terrell, and I was in the higher ed program, graduated in 2016. So I currently am the Director of Member Engagement with the Coalition for College, which is a college access nonprofit that works to provide tools and resources for first-gen low-income students and partners with over 160 colleges and universities to make that happen. So when I first got to Hugsy, I had been doing admissions and admissions consulting for the about 6 years, and I thought this was my time to kind of pivot. So I did an assistantship in res ed and student activities, and I also thought I was going to be a dean of students. That was kind of the path that I was going. However, through some of the classes and the networks that I formed at Hugsy, I actually thought, you know what, maybe admissions in this college access world is the world that I do want to stay in. And so I ended up actually going back into admissions, which then led me to the nonprofit world, which I absolutely love right now. It also kind of helped me go back to school. So I went and got my EDD at UCLA, as I'm located in Pasadena, California. So yeah, definitely did not see myself going this route, but I love where I've been and where I'm going. And a lot of that was thanks to the network and the people that I met at Hugsy. So thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Saya, and how about you?
Thank you so much. So I am, again, EDM, class of 97, in the now reorganized administration planning and social policy program. And at the time, I was committed to studying, in particular, how school districts operate, or in many cases do not operate. And I was particularly interested in examining issues of equity and access. And I'd like to echo what other folks have said about having a nonlinear path to where I am now. So I'm currently working as an independent consultant, focusing on policy issues and supporting the implementation of initiatives from birth through post-secondary. There are particular threads, though, that I would say I've carried with me since my Hugsy years. So one is, again, the focus on issues of equity and access, particularly as they pertain to communities of color and other historically underserved students. So that remains a thread. I'm also passionate about thinking systemically about policy implementation and looking at systemic and institutional barriers. And then the third piece, which is more recent, is my focus on thinking about the education continuum from birth through post-secondary in my work experience, and especially as I again mentioned, when I started in K-12, I found that the work was incredibly siloed. So I had the opportunity to serve as a state policymaker here in Massachusetts, where I'm based. And that experience was transformative from a professional standpoint because it opened my eyes to the importance of thinking about transitions for students as they move from early education to K-12, K-12 to higher ed and beyond, and K-12 to any type of post-secondary opportunity for that matter. So those are the anchors to my work as a consultant. And similar to what Derek said, I think it was my willingness to be open to new opportunities that has enabled me to have this nonlinear journey. And as I reflect back on my experience, I'm grateful, and I would not have had it any other way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sayan. Ushma, how about you?
Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I graduated with from the Urban Superintendent's Program, which also no longer exists. But I graduated in 2008, and even though it was called the Urban Superintendent's Program, I am now 16 days into my first superintendency. So there's a couple of things that's important about that. While my colleagues are sharing the non-linearity of their journey, I would characterize mine as slow motion. That is to say, I graduated in 2008, in a program that was training superintendents for large urban superintendencies. And I'm just now taking this. And I guess I would, as I reflect on that, I've spent time as a cabinet member and a principal supervisor in the Chicago Public Schools, and then the second largest school district in Illinois. And I think it's because I like being that close to the work. I've enjoyed that. So maybe my thought is that I probably it's taken me longer to get here, but maybe some advice and a reflection would be to still go at our own pace and stay close to have proximity to the work that feels right for us. And, that served me well so far. I feel like I am in the right place at the right time in Oak Park in my new superintendency. I'm really excited about that. So it's good to be here with everybody.
Thank you, Ishma. Will.
Well, one, I'd have to say for Ishma, I'm excited as a resident here in Oak Park and a child in the Oak Park public school system to have someone who I know has a passion and thought for the work. So that's very exciting for me to hear. I took, again, as the theme goes, sort of a non-traditional route. I did a business undergrad degree, went back at an MBA, and was really in sort of real estate and development and sort of finance work. And then found myself really trying to figure out how to improve communities of color, particularly those that have been disinvested in. And an opportunity opened up at the University of Chicago to lead their civic engagement work. And so I pursued that and was fortunate to get the position. And then there, as an associate vice president of civic engagement, tried to figure out how a university could leverage its research and employment capacity to improve the neighborhoods, right? So I'm really looking at sort of the town gown issues that exist across the country. And in that, I realized that higher educational systems or networks are very complex organizations. And so then enrolled at Higgsey in the Management, Leadership, and Education program in 2014 to really sort of get a grasp and understanding about how all this stuff really sort of works and the policies and things that are there. And then since then have gone back to get a PhD, and in fact have loved sort of being in higher ed so much that I went back at a PhD where my thesis was really in the corporate social responsibility of universities as it relates to its administration side, not the educational piece, but the administration side. And how do we leverage our ability to buy and produce and hire in a way that's mutually beneficial or equitable to those communities around campuses in the state and things as a whole. And have since loved that work so much that I then took a faculty position, left the University of Chicago, and took a faculty position at Northwestern at the Kellogg School of Management, where my entire research and work is really about how do we leverage opportunities for underrepresented individuals. And so now I just created a new course called Kellogg Ventures, where we're trying to figure out the heuristics that prevent women and minorities of color from getting venture equity capital. And so I'm really trying to figure out how do we fund these ideas and do these sorts of things. And so the Higgsy background in education has been tremendous for me in just opening up my mind and opportunities about policy, about opportunities and ways of looking at how we can leverage institutions in a positive way to really impact not just on the educational side, but the tremendous amount of spend and economic engine that universities are to improve the communities as a whole. And so it's been fantastic. The network has been great. And I've been able to leverage that to really duplicate this work in many places across the country through alumni networks.
Thank you so much, Will. What I'd like to ask each of you to reflect on a bit in this next round of questions is, how has your racial identity and issues of racial justice impacted and/or informed your work? We've heard what you stated explicitly, but perhaps you can share with us a little bit more deeply. Anedri, could you kick it off?
Sure. I think the issues of race, equity, access were so embedded in my career experiences in higher education, especially when we started talking about the faculty and staff that would serve the university that I was working at the time, which was Emory University, and really thinking about what kind of educational experience do we want to create for the students that were coming through the university. So when I think about the policy component of what I learned at Higgsy, that really shaped a lot of the programs that I was able to develop, the policies that I was able to influence, and make sure that we were walking the talk. So if we wanted to have diverse students join our university, how were we preparing our faculty and staff to serve them? So I've seen that thread in all of the roles that I have, and I even see it now as a consultant and as an HR consultant, still pushing the value of equity, diversity, belonging, inclusion. That never left me while I was at Higgsy. I think it got amplified at Higgsy, and then it just became a part of everything I did as a professional. So I think you may hear similar things from some of our colleagues, but for me, I felt like I had the capacity to bring those conversations to the table so that it would become policy. So that was part of my journey.
Thanks, Anedri. Derek, how about you?
Awesome. Yeah, so I was actually a part of the first cohort that had the Ethnic Studies in Education course at Higgsy when it was offered, which was an incredible course. And I still am very close with V, who is the professor there, who's doing some amazing things. But I definitely think the way that my racial identity and kind of what I learned at Higgsy impacted it. It was more than, when I think about admissions and college access, everyone really just talks about that access piece, providing a seat at the table for students and other folks. But for me, it was really not just being able to bring students in and make sure that they have a seat at the table, but also making sure that they're supported and provided with the resources to be successful, and that they also have a voice and power at that table. So making sure that decision-making power was also brought with that seat. So I think everything that I learned at Higgsy and everything, pretty much in my life, my racial identity has really informed the work that I do, my passion, and the work that I continue to do in hopefully changing some policies around access for students.
Thanks, Derek. Se-Yeon, how about you?
Thanks so much, folks. So I identify as a Korean American woman of color, and that identity shapes every aspect of my being. It influences literally everything that I do and how I operate in all the spaces that I occupy. And as a professional, I briefly mentioned when I responded to the last question, my non-linear journey I've served as an admission officer, as a researcher, evaluator, state policymaker, and now as a consultant. And throughout all those stages of my career, similar to what other folks have said, equity and access, inclusion, belonging have been embedded in all of those chapters of my work. So I continue to fight the fight in every space that I'm in through my particular lens, which is, again, policy development and implementation, and thinking about systemic reform. And on a personal note, I think the challenge and opportunity that I grapple with on an ongoing basis is, how much do I bring of myself? Certainly I fight the fight, as I mentioned, but how much of my individual self do I bring into those conversations as I engage colleagues in these discussions about these issues? So I'm going to quote a Hugsy friend of mine who always talked about this work being an obligation and an opportunity for folks who choose this path. And at times it's a struggle, and it's difficult at times to witness what we are witnessing. But I never regret the choice that I've made to continue to engage in this work and continue to do it with the different opportunities and the different roles that I've had. So I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Siyun. Ushma.
I think growing up in a predominantly white community as a non-white individual, like always just kind of, but not ever checking some of the default kind of assumptions. It wasn't until I went into a teacher training program in which we were asked to reflect on those experiences and unpack them that I started to really understand that schools were the places where we either replicate or interrupt that kind of identity, and whether or not we can rewire school systems and school experiences to be more inclusive depends on how we teach, learn, and organize them. And so that's really the central understanding of why we have to, create great public schools that are related to the strength of our democracy, and why racial justice is needs to be centered in that work. That's an everyday part of how I think about what I do as a teacher and as a leader. So that it's kind of built into how I entered the field.
Thank you, Ushma. Will.
I think it's interesting, given my experience at two fairly quote elite sort of institutions, be it the University of Chicago or at Northwestern, I find it challenging in a couple of ways. One, there is what a Stanford professor refers to as a cultural taxation that we pay as few minorities within institutions are then asked to then carry the burden for so if there's anything around racial equity panel, Black History Month, those sorts of things, I am like fully booked, for the entire month on 17 or 18 panels. Then there are the students who are starving to speak with someone who may have had similar experiences and things. And so you carry that. And then in addition to that, then research load and teaching load. And so that cultural taxation is something I often bring up in faculty senate meetings to sort of understand this extra burden that we have to sort of carry on top of then people not thinking you should be here. Right, just on all of that. And so I think that is something that I sort of have reflected on and sort of think about. The other thing too, which is interesting, is because of the types of courses that I teach, I draw a certain type of student. And you start to believe, because this is the sort of bucket that I look at, that, wow, the school is fairly diverse. I'm seeing all these minority students in my class and people eager. And then I go to commencement, and I realized just how small of a percentage of minority or underrepresented students are actually in the institution. And it is something that I often, again, sort of reflect on, because we're in our own cipher sometimes where I'm having 60 students or 50 students and maybe half the classes of some minority background. And then you look at the institution and you realize that they are seeking me out, or some of the subject topics, but just how much of a minority we are in these institutions. And so it is something that I have carried, and I'm starting to speak up a little bit more about. in trying to figure out how do we resolve these things. But we also recognize we're not all on the same page. And so how do we sort of have these conversations in ways that moves the institution forward? I'll give one quick example. Like a lot of institutions, we're trying to figure out how do we increase our underrepresented student body. We have then some faculty members who have concerns that how do we increase the minority student body without somehow damaging or violating non-minority students' opportunities to participate, right? So this is a legitimate question that you've got to sort of recognize that's in the room and try to work with. And so it really sort of, in many cases, led me to believe we have come a long way, but we still have so much work to do. And it is something that can't just be the burden of us as minority and people of color, but how do we find our allies and others who are there that could help carry the message and try to find equity within these institutions.
Thank you, Will. I so wish I could ask you all follow-up questions. Fortunately, we don't have time. For this last round, what is one word of advice that you would like to offer new graduates? And Adri?
I would say stay curious, because your journey in learning in this field is never over. So stay curious.
Thank you. Derek.
All right, well, I'm gonna just kind of go along that. So stay curious and then stay connected. I think there's definitely this really great network of people that are at Hugsy, and I think this can definitely be one of those networks that you kind of fall back on. But having that network and being connected, it's going to open up a lot of doors for you, not just at Harvard or in what you're looking at now or what you're doing now, but as you see, can also open up a lot of doors in other fields that you might not have ever even known that you would be interested in. So stay connected.
Great one. Thanks, Derek. Seyon?
I'm going to offer two pieces of advice that I wish someone had said to me back when I graduated eons ago, to my younger self. But the first is that there is no wrong, or there's no wrong decision, and the counter is that there's no perfect career decision that you can make. I think at times folks put a lot of pressure on themselves to make what they think is the best decision or the right decision. And what I've learned over the course of my career is that you make the decision based on the opportunities before you and the situation that you're in. And you should trust yourself that you're making the right decision for you at the time. And there's always something that you can learn from whatever opportunity you embrace. The second is own your space and own all the spaces that you occupy. And I wish that someone had encouraged me to continually empower myself to own the spaces as a professional, as an individual. I've learned how to do that over the years, but I wish I had been advised to do that earlier in my life. So those would be my two pieces of advice.
Thanks so much, Seyon. Ushma?
Yep. I'd say stay in close proximity to your why and what it is you love about your work and the reason you started here in the first place.
Will?
And I'll just offer two. First is to pivot. So don't be afraid to pivot and change as things come. As Santa said, things will come up in opportunities. And then the second one is persevere. So they seem to be opposed, but I would say don't give up on your dreams, push through if you can, but then also be open to opportunities that may be slightly outside of where you thought you would go.
Thank you so much, all of you. Such deep words of wisdom.